In the last few weeks, we've seen the approach of the Artemis II mission symbolized by the joining of the biggest pieces of the rocket and the release of the crew's mission patch. While simultaneously, the rumors grow that it's all going to be canceled by President Trump and Elon Musk. Now that Jared Isaacman's nomination hearing is scheduled for this coming Wednesday, April 9th, the question in April 2025 isn't so much whether he supports returning to the moon as a future concept, but whether he supports returning to the moon using Orion and SLS. It's wishful thinking to expect any senator to ask him directly whether he thinks the current programs are broken and need to be replaced, but we'll be watching. Hey everyone, welcome back. Thanks for watching. As usual, we have strong currents running in opposite directions. The politics is easier to summarize, but it's the more consequential. The Wall Street Journal published a story last weekend that adds weight to the rumors that Trump and Musk want to dismantle Artemis and pivot to Mars. Even at that, it's not a confirmation, they're still just rumors. Let's see if Mr. Isaacman reveals anything on Wednesday. Running in the opposite direction is the prominent display of the Artemis II patch that was revealed on Thursday, April 3rd. It is symbolic and shouldn't change the fundamentals of the situation. But it's symbolic, so does it symbolize a change? There was also non-symbolic, non-political news this week to go over. The Gateway Halo module was finally transported to the U.S., and NASA's Exploration Ground Systems program finished their certification training to support recovery of the Artemis II crew and spacecraft at the end of the mission. But we'll start with the politics that affects all of Artemis. At midnight on Sunday, March 30th, the Wall Street Journal published a story citing several sources that aligns with previous rumors that the administration is planning an Artemis overhaul. The rumors were that all the Artemis programs would be defunded by Trump and Musk, and the budget would be reprogrammed for commercial Mars transportation. The social media post that accompanies the story says that SLS would be terminated, but also that the Starship lunar lander could be too. Since practically no one in Washington is going on the record commenting on the future of specific programs, or whether they are for or against SLS specifically or Artemis generally being terminated, all the usual caveats apply. It's politics, after all. Even if the HLS contract were dissolved at this point, SpaceX has already completed and been paid for most of the negotiated front-loaded milestones. Milestone payments for the major tech demonstrations and functionality that NASA is depending on, including a propellant transfer demonstration, an uncrewed lunar landing demonstration, and the crewed lunar landing as a part of Artemis III, would amount to less than half of the overall value of the contract. And being released from the contract in the near term would also release Musk and SpaceX from needing to meet their obligations to Artemis for lunar landings in support of Artemis 3 and 4. Terminating Artemis and focusing government spending on crewed Mars transportation better aligns with Musk's goals for SpaceX. Right now, the moon is only a contractual obligation for SpaceX. It's much more obvious that Musk and his company are committed to Mars. Giving up or trading in a lower balance of lunar funding for newer, bigger Mars government contracts would symbolize the rumors that have been circulating for the past few months. A few days later, on April 2nd, the Senate Commerce, Science, and Transportation Committee scheduled Jared Isaacman's nomination to be the next NASA administrator for Wednesday, April 9th. As I said at the top, it's wishful thinking to expect any of the players in this proverbial political poker game to tip their hand at this point. It's much more likely that Isaacman won't want to comment until after he's confirmed, although he has commented in the past. It's also likely that Republican senators won't want to publicly oppose anything that Trump and Musk support. But it will still be interesting to hear what they say, and if they say nothing, in many words, we may be able to read between those lines and words. Eventually, though, the fate of SLS and Artemis is going to come down to how much funding is in appropriations and how many vote for that later this year. The Artemis II astronaut crew released their mission patch on Thursday, April 3rd, and eventually it occurred to me that it was 2 years to the day from when their selection to the crew was announced to the public. In conjunction with the release of the patch, a couple of different videos of a patch or the patch in different locations at different NASA centers were posted on social media. A couple of images of the crew holding the patch in Building 9 at the Johnson Space Center were also posted. And that evening, the insignia was projected onto the south side of the vehicle assembly building at the Kennedy Space Center, underneath the agency's meatball logo that is permanently painted there.
We're here with Caden, Frank, and Big Hoss Dalton, myself and Jeremy, in our ship. This is the Artemis II spacecraft.
Commander Reed Weissman posted the weekly crew video shot from inside the Orion crew module, which is being closed out for handover from prime contractor Lockheed Martin to NASA Exploration Ground Systems. This is the first visual of the spacecraft since pictures of it after the service module fairings were installed in the transfer aisle of the Neil Armstrong Operations and Checkout building a couple of weeks ago. Presumably, the spacecraft is back in the final assembly systems test cell for final installations and closeouts before that handover, which was still projected for the end of this month. NASA Exploration Ground Systems and the U.S. Navy held a media event at Naval Base San Diego on March 31st, following completion of the underway Recovery Test 12. EGS is responsible for landing and recovery of Artemis crews and their Orion spacecraft, and works with the U.S. Department of Defense to safely retrieve them at sea when they splash down at the end of the mission. NASA and the military will continue training exercises, but this was the certification run ahead of Artemis II for the nominal end of mission that is planned off the coast of San Diego. Following splashdown, a team of Navy divers will make sure the area around the capsule is safe and then set up a raft for the crew to egress the spacecraft. They will then be lifted one by one from the raft into a helicopter and taken back to the U.S. Navy amphibious ship for a medical evaluation. The recovery team will then begin recovering the Orion crew module, attaching towing lines, and bringing it into the well deck of the amphibious ship. Other members of the open water recovery team will also attempt to recover the forward bay cover and the parachutes that are jettisoned and released during the splashdown sequence. The Artemis II flight crew took part in the previous test, URT-11, back in February of last year. For this test, another 4 astronauts participated, which allows more of them to get that experience. For Artemis II, at least 2 of the astronauts that went through the recovery exercises will be directly supporting the mission. Andre Douglas is the NASA backup crew member for Artemis II, and Stan Love is the lead capsule communicator, or Capcom, for the mission. European Space Agency astronaut Luca Parmitano and NASA astronaut Denise Burnham also played the role of returning Artemis crew members for URT-12. A full-scale mock-up of the Orion crew module, the crew module test article, is deployed to simulate a returning spacecraft, and then the astronauts are taken out to the test article to get on board before the recovery test begins. The URT-12 exercise was the certification run for the EGS landing and recovery team, which practiced finalized crew and spacecraft recovery procedures on the USS Somerset. During the media event, Artemis II landing and recovery director Lily Villarreal said that the URT-9 exercise was a certification run prior to Artemis I. The EGS team had a certified process for recovering the spacecraft, which they employed when the Artemis I Orion crew module returned to Earth in December 2022. In the 3 URT recovery tests since then, the landing and recovery team has worked out how to coordinate recovery of the crew as a first priority with recovery of the spacecraft. Villarreal said at the media event that after testing and reviewing multiple options for bringing the crew back to the Navy ship from the spacecraft, the final choice was for a helicopter to pick all 4 of them up from the so-called front porch raft that will be set up after splashdown. That will get the crew back to the ship within the 2-hour requirement. The crew can be evaluated or examined in the ship's medical bay if necessary. Depending on how close or how far from San Diego the splashdown area is, the crew would then be flown back to San Diego when the ship is within flying range before heading back to their home in Houston. Villarreal also said during the media event that there are plans for at least 2 more practice exercises before the mission. The next one is planned for June off the coast of Cape Canaveral and Kennedy Space Center, where EGS will practice with the Air Force for launch abort contingencies. They will be bringing the Crew Module Test Article, or CMTA, back to KSC for the Valiant, or I thought I heard it pronounced Valiant exercises. That acronym stands for End-to-End Mission Validation Event, or some part of that. The Sources Sought solicitation released a couple of years ago talks about a pad abort exercise closer to the shoreline and an ascent abort exercise a little farther out. As landing and recovery director for the first crewed Artemis launch, Villarreal will be on console in the firing room for the countdown before handing over to another teammate after launch and redeploying to San Diego to get ready for a splashdown off the west coast. She also said that just before launch, maybe around the time the vehicle rolls to the pad, they will conduct what she called a mini URT on board the ship that will recover the crew and spacecraft. The Navy ships in that group are assigned or will be assigned to Artemis II on 90-day rotations, so they will do a just-in-time exercise on board whichever one is assigned right before the Artemis II launch countdown begins. The media event in San Diego provided an opportunity to speak with multiple people who are going to be supporting Artemis II. Stan Love noted that the URT-12 experience will be valuable to him and the flight control team for the reentry. So you said you're going to be back up. Will you be kind of like a weather Capcom?
No, actually, I'll be sitting next to the entry Capcom.
Okay.
And because I just did this, I know exactly what the crew is going to be going through after they're in the water. The rest of the flight control team doesn't. So I came here to get this experience so that I could bring it into the control center and advise the Capcom and flight director for what happens after splashdown. Does that make sense?
Yeah. I got a chance to ask Andre Douglas about how the backup crew member would work. He is the backup crew member for the 3 NASA astronauts, and Jenny Gibbons is the backup for Canadian Space Agency astronaut Jeremy Hansen. Do you train for, I mean, there's a commander, there's a pilot, and then there's 2 mission specialists.
Yes.
Do you train for specific, or do you have to cross-train a little bit?
It's a great question. So right now, there are designated seats, like you said, and when it comes to a U.S. crew member not being able to go, we have a plan to where I'm always going to take the spot where Christina sits, which is seat 4, and that's right by the hatch. And so if somebody else goes down, like Victor or Reed, then Christina's going to slide to their seat. So you're always training for that same spot. Christina's always looking at the pilot spot, and Victor's always looking at Reed's spot, and Reed has his spot. So it's a lot easier, I think, to just have everybody kind of know those one spots. But at the same time, like when the prime crew goes and they do the execution of the mission, they're also going to cross-train, right? Because something can happen while they're up there, and if somebody goes down and they need to do some sort of maneuvering, like they want to know and be familiar with like how to execute burns and things like that. So it's like a little bit of both cross-training and then focusing on one. But for me, I'm really focusing on Christina's hatch role.
Okay. So it sounds like each of them would rotate to a specific seat in the contingency hypothetical where one of the 3 NASA crew could not fly. It's very unlikely, but they are training so that they are prepared, as he said, not just pre-flight, but also for hypotheticals during the flight. He also noted that both he and Jenny Gibbons are training for the Capcom and Astronaut Support Person, or ASP, roles. The Astronaut Support Person is a member of the closeout crew who will help assist the flight crew on launch day getting into Orion from the White Room on the mobile launcher, then getting situated lying on their back in their seats, and getting configured for launch and ascent. Who will take which role hasn't been decided yet, and they will both continue to train for those crew support roles. I also got a chance to ask a few other questions. If you are interested, videos of that Q&A are available for members of the channel. On Friday, April 4th, NASA announced that the Gateway Habitation and Logistics Outpost module had arrived in the U.S. earlier in the week. The Halo module was flown via an Antonov 124 cargo plane from Turin, Italy to Phoenix, Arizona. The frame or primary structure of the module, along with elements such as the docking port hatches, was assembled and tested by Thales Alenia Space in Turin. With welding, proof and load testing, and some outfitting completed at TASI, pictures of the element being prepared for shipment, being loaded onto the Antonov, and the plane's departure from Italy were published by NASA with the Friday announcement. In these pictures of the halo going into the shipping container, we can see both ends of the module. This end with the axial docking port will be for gateway visiting vehicles and future modules. The other end, which is seen less frequently, will end up being bolted to an inter-element adapter that connects halo to the power and propulsion element. NASA also published stills taken after arrival at the Phoenix Mesa Gateway Airport on Tuesday, April 1st. The frame of the module is headed to the relatively nearby facility of prime contractor Northrop Grumman in Gilbert, Arizona. The majority of the halo outfitting remains, and most of that will be completed in Arizona. Wiring, coolant lines, computers, and other equipment will need to be laid out inside the module to change it from a passive structure to a working spacecraft. More details of that work and how long that's going to take to complete are questions going forward. Once that work is complete, the module will be shipped to the Cape Canaveral Kennedy Space Center area in Florida, where Northrop Grumman will join the PPE and Halo modules together and make final launch preparations, such as encapsulating the co-manifested vehicle in an extended-length Falcon Heavy fairing. The most recent target date for launch released by NASA was no earlier than 2027, which is taken to mean no earlier than the end of 2027. Thanks as always for watching. Click on the like button if you found this video informative, and consider subscribing to find out what's going on with Artemis every week. If you're willing to make a one-time donation, I would really appreciate it. I put a link to my Buy Me a Coffee page in the description. Your donations will make it possible to make more field trips to NASA centers and contractor facilities in the US. I also recently added YouTube memberships to this channel, and I want to thank all the people who have joined so far. I am planning on posting additional videos there and more frequent updates on what's happening during the week. I included a separate link to join in the description, but you can also click on the join button on this page above the description, and there's also a place to join on the channel homepage. Thanks for your support.